to an end, and about 31 different groups of rebels have managed to not just topple the regime but force Bashar al-Assad to flee Syria. As the world came to terms with the instability that West Asia is witnessing once again, Assad landed in Russia, reportedly a safe haven for him, with Vladimir Putin having backed him since the 2011 uprising. Take a listen to how two of the key players in this entire conflict have reacted so far.
This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks.
זה יום היסטורי בתולדות המזרח התיכון. משטר אסד, חוליה מרכזית בציר הרשע של איראן. המשטר הזה נפל. זוהי תוצאה ישירה של המכות שהנחתנו על איראן ועל חיזבאללה, התומכות העיקריות של משטר אסד. זה יצר תגובת שרשרת ברחבי המזרח התיכון של כל אלה שרוצים להשתחרר ממשטר הדיכוי והרודנות הזה.
Now, Assad's 24-year-long rule in Syria has been marred with allegations of human rights abuse, violence and suppression. A man who was a trained ophthalmologist, who was once touted as the one who will lead economic growth in Syria, is now being called a dictator. What began with a teenage boy spray painting graffiti against Assad back in 2011, writing "It's your turn, doctor" on a wall, and his subsequent torture by the Assad regime has now ended in what the boy had aimed to do 13 years back: finish the Assad rule in Syria. But the man at the center of this upheaval and chaos isn't just Bashar al-Assad. Abu Muhammad al-Jalani spearheaded the surprise rebellion against Assad a few days back. He leads Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, a former Al-Qaida affiliate, previously also known as the Al-Nusra Front. Under Barack Obama's presidency, the U.S. not just supported rebels of Al-Qaida and ISIS, but they were reportedly trained by the CIA as well. All eyes are now on al-Jalani, on what he does next and whether these opposition forces are able to deliver a democratic, inclusive government in Syria, considering that the 31 small and big rebel groups have had differences in the past and have broken away to form other factions. Now, these rapidly changing developments, remember, come amid crucial geopolitical situations: the Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas war, and the incoming Donald Trump presidency. While many observers say that this is a big setback for Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, others believe that US and Syria's neighbors, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan, shouldn't be celebrating so early and wait for how the Syrian chaos turns out eventually. Let's try and understand what happens in Syria and what's going to happen next. On Global Mirror, I'm going to be joined by a panel of expert voices who are going to break it down for us. Currently, I am joined by Nikita Menkovich, director of the Eurasian Analytical Club. He's a Russian voice that joins our panel this evening. Kamar Aga, foreign affairs expert, is also expected to join us. I'm also joined by Dr. John Harrison, Homeland Security expert. And we're also expecting Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakrabarti to join us on Global Mirror. Good evening and namaskar to both of you gentlemen. First of all, let me start with you, Nikita. You know, for a lot of observers and experts, all right, I believe we don't have that audio connection right now established with Nikita. We'll try and do that, but let me come to you. Let's try and go to Dr. John Harrison, if you can hear me. Dr. Harrison, if you're able to hear me, you know, how do you see this situation? A lot of people believe that this is a big strategic setback for Russia. For the United States of America, this seems like a big win in the West Asian region. They have been backing the rebels against the Assad regime right from the time of Barack Obama. How do you see the situation currently?
Well, this is it's a major victory, obviously, for the Syrian people. They have been able to remove a president who has been in power for, as you said, almost a quarter of a century, but a family that has been in power for almost 50 years. Geostrategically, it is certainly a very important change. It's great that people are celebrating. We don't know what the outcome will be yet. I did want to take one issue with how you introduced the piece. The United States was not supporting Al-Qaida or Daesh, ISIS, during the buildup. And part of the problem for the U.S., at least specifically, was it was looking for allies and partners to overthrow the regime, and it was having trouble finding them. At one point, the U.S. military had managed to train 4 opposition fighters that were not somehow connected with opposition that the U.S. was uncomfortable with. So that's going to be the big test, of course. HTS has gone through a number of iterations. Jelani is saying all the right things. It appears that the record that they've had in Idlib has been charitably put mixed. But if they do stick with the rhetoric of the leadership, Syria may have a potential, as long as Al-Qaida and Daesh, and certainly HTS, is not partnered with either one of those, and we'll have to take their rhetoric on face value, at least at the moment. But it is certainly a significant blow to Russia. It is a very significant blow to Iran, and particularly to its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Syria was being used as a direct land link to be able to make sure that Hezbollah was able to stay armed and equipped and financed by Iran. Now that is out of the question now. What is also interesting, and will play out over the next few months, will be how do potential partners of Russia and potential proxies of Iran see this? Neither country came to the aid of the Assad regime. Now, there's very legitimate reasons for that. The Syrian army did not seem to want to actually engage in any fighting. And no matter how many forces Iran was able to send in or how many aircraft Russia deployed, that was not going to change the realities on the ground. But it does send a message to potential partners and allies and the Iranian proxies that if push comes to shove, will they be there for us? And that's a major question for the region and much and beyond as well.
Okay. We'll have to see how that moves on. And I'm going to come back to you on the point of the American involvement, the alleged American involvement. Let me also get in my other guests on the panel into this conversation. Nikinda Menkovic is there with us. We're also joined by Ambassador Pinakranjan Chakrabarti. Good evening and namaskar to both of you. Nikita, we were just talking about how a lot of experts and observers see this entire developing situation in Syria and West Asia as a big blow to Russia and Iran, especially to the prestige of Vladimir Putin, who has been protecting Assad since the past several years, but clearly now has not been able to.
First of all, we should divide the view of the situation from the Syria and from Russia. From the Syria point of view, the last events is a tragedy. We can think that Assad was good or he was bad, but now it is capital anarchy at the streets. Criminal gangs attacking banks, private houses, killing people in the big cities. In the smaller population cities, in a lot of places, we have war against each other. By the ethnical groups and political groups as a Syria. Of course, such situation is a tragedy. As I said, you may think that Assad was bad or good, but what we have now, it is worse for Syrian people. It is a tragedy. It's terrible. But from the Russian perspective, in fact, it's not a failure or a victory, because you should know that Russia didn't run any capital military operations in Syria for 8 years. There was no big projects there. Of course, our countries were partners, but only interest of Russia in Syria are 2 military bases, Khmeimim and Tarsus. That is our goal. That is our biggest question. Looking now on these 2 bases, we can say it is everything okay. New power in Damascus produced guarantees that it will secure these 2 military bases and that they will not be attacked. It sounds good because it means that power in Syria may have changed,
Okay.
but cooperation with Russia is demanded by all political forces who is trying to control the country. But as I said, of course, the last events are the tragedy because really a lot of people now suffering, attacked by criminals, afraid on these days of instability. Of course, we may hope that the future will be better, but I don't think that all this blood,
Okay.
all this horror is a good price to change just one man, Assad. You may like him or dislike,
Okay.
but
Okay.
during his rule, the
Okay,
life
Nikita,
was
let me get in
stable.
Ambassador Pinakaranjan Chakravarti on this. Ambassador Chakravarti, this is something that has been debated since the past 2 days, whether Bashar al-Assad should be seen as a good man for Syria or a bad man for Syria, in the simplest of terms, if I have to, put the question across to you. Some say he's a dictator, some say he's made out to be a dictator. How should one see him?
Well, I think it's for the Syrian people to decide how they wanted to see or want to see Assad. It's not for Indians to decide, or for that matter, anybody else. So I think there's a lot of stories
Certainly,
about
Ambassador
Assad.
Chakrabarti, but you've got, several Syrians celebrating the fall of Assad, but you've also got, the likes of the entire opposition forces fighting against him.
Well, there was a civil war which began in 2011 post the Arab Spring, in which a lot of countries dabbled in and helped this faction or that faction. And today we know that Turkey has been helping the what was called the Syrian Free Army, and now it has all joined together under this
Yes.
banner of the Hayat, Tahrir al-Sham, led by Jolani, who is a former ISIS and Al-Qaida person, and has been, of course, moderating his position now, because now that they are virtually in power, in the sense they are controlling the capital. But what it means for Syria in the future is, I think there will be more chaos. There will be perhaps, the civil war that is happening. For example, the Kurds in the north are certainly not going to accept any regime like, if they impose one of Islamic radical, will it be another Taliban, or will it be more akin to ISIS? And you can see how Israel is so worried, because they have already bombed all the depots and all where the missiles and the arms were kept, because they don't want these arms to get into the hand of the HTS. And also they have entered from the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights itself, where I have been there because I was posted in Israel, and I've seen I went right up to the front to see Quneitra on the other side. And I know that they had done it, strategically to build a buffer. So today they are probably trying to expand that buffer. So I see Israel maybe grabbing some more territory in Syria, and just to protect themselves, I think, because this HTS is a completely unknown entity, in the sense that how they will govern, they are an Islamic radical jihadi organization. There's no doubt about it. So what kind of a rule will they? Will they have will they usher in democracy, have a free and fair election? I have my doubts, because those coming from the radical fringe of Islamism do not really believe in democracy. They believe in Khilafat, they believe in Sharia law, etc. And I know that in Bangladesh also there are some of these elements who are today talking about an Islamic Khilafat and imposing Sharia law. So the ideology doesn't change. So it's going to remain the same. And so I am not sanguine about peace and stability and democracy returning, not returning, but being established in Syria.
Okay, let me take this across to Mr. Kamar Aga. He is, of course, somebody who's a leading voice of the West Asian region. He's an expert who can, simplify for us what we can expect in the next few weeks. Mr. Kamar Aga, good evening, namaskar. This is something that now the world has its eyes on. What happens next? You've got an Abu al-Jalani who had some other words earlier in the past. He came across as somebody who's a radical and extremist, who's against the minorities. He's also spoken against the Christian minorities in Syria in the past. Now he seems to have a sort of changed tone where he's saying, I'm going to take everybody along, and Syria needs a stable government. And he's also sort of positioning himself as separate from the other jihadists. What can we expect, therefore, in the next few weeks? Because there are so many different factions and groups of opposition forces that were fighting against Assad, that will it be now possible for everybody to get along and position Syria into a stable country?
I don't think, I fully support, the ambassador Saab, what he has said, as long as this transition is taking place, that may be smooth. Because Assad also instructed, for peaceful transition, and the Syrian army was not prepared to fight, the prime minister is cooperating with them. The problem will come once about the sharing of power with various groups, because there are two types of militant groups within this. One is Al-Qaida, backed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the other one is Ikhwan-e-Muslimin, yani Muslim Brotherhood groups are there. Both have different ideology. There was a conversion of interest, as far as Assad was concerned. So all of them united to oust him. But, will they be able to govern? Most of the people doubt about it, because even in the region, there are number of players in Syria. Americans are occupying one part of the Syria. Then the other part, is Idlib group, Idlib province, where these militants came from, who are backed by Turkey. Turkey has its own interest, wanted to make a buffer zone between Turkey and Syrian and Turkish Kurdish-held areas of Syria. Israeli wanted, that the Syrian should be partitioned into 3 states, because then only, peace and stability would come, because Syria have too many minorities, and there are a lot of problems within the Syria. Second thing, apart from this, they have no money. How do they going to run? Nobody is going to give them money. And some of these groups have very close ties with Israel. And they were trained in Ukraine, Kyiv, and from where they have learned how to fly drones, and they receive funding also. Another element now is coming up, they got training in Idlib, as well as in Jordan, was also involved, apart from Turkey. And Pakistani generals were also present, were monitoring them and giving them instructions before it's coming. And these groups have money, these groups have weapons, they have that one. Syrian army have lots of weapons, most of it, were already bombed out by Israel in the past. We have seen in last 6 months, and then secondly, this chaos and anarchy gradually might come. This is what most of the people are predicting, as Ambassador has said just now. Secondly, the possibility of it is spreading into Iraq, because that is the area which Syria borders with Iraq, has a long border with Iraq. And
so the ripple effects of which, Mr. Aga, might go on to the other West Asian countries, that is, of course, a big concern as well. But Dr. Harrison, talking about what Donald Trump has said, he's blamed the Barack Obama presidency for this entire mess. He's also said that, if that time the U.S. didn't get involved in this entire chaos, the situation would have been different. and the fact that now when he becomes the president, he's not going to get involved in this entire mess, and that it's Russia's problem and it's the West Asian problem. It's not the American problem.
Well, that's certainly consistent with what he tried to do during his first administration. The U.S. forces that are out in Eastern Syria, while technically they're there to try to make sure that Daesh, ISIS, for the international audience, isn't able to gain any momentum or at least regain any presence or significant presence. The reality was they were there to monitor the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and the supplies coming in from Iran to not only the Iranian-supported militias there coming out of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other places, but also making sure that weapons weren't getting to Hezbollah. So now that it would appear, at least, that Iran no longer has the leverage it once did, many of those groups will be leaving, at least potentially leaving. The U.S. presence there doesn't really have quite as much of a requirement. If you're worried about Daesh, you can certainly use air power like the U.S. has been doing in the last week or so. The U.S. is not engaged in heavy ground combat, though there's certainly some going on. But it is really about the geopolitics, and it doesn't seem to be as important. The president-elect has obviously made that position quite clear, not only during his campaign, but also during the first administration. So I think the U.S.
But you know, Dr. Harrison, what's interesting is that the last time around, Donald Trump, under his presidency, had said the exact same thing, that U.S. will not get involved in the Syrian chaos. Yet, eventually, when the chemical was used against Syrian citizens by Bashar al-Assad, there were American strikes that were done on air bases in Syria to destroy them. So, do you think Donald Trump will be able to sort of let the U.S. not get involved? Do you think they'll be able to stay away from the kind of mess that Syria and the West Asian region is, which will have its ripple effect, not just in the entire region, but the world?
I think definitely it could. Remember, any U.S. involvement that happened in Syria during the Obama administration, particularly as you mentioned with the WMD, the chemical weapons problem, was actually created by the president himself. When President Obama said, remember, he said any chemical weapons moving around or being used would cross a red line for the United States and its international partners. Syria did it, and then the president was looking for any way possible not to do what he said he was going to do. The British Parliament helped bail him out in that sense. So I think if you're going to make a statement that you're going to be involved, then you need to follow through on that. And President Trump has been very consistent, rightfully or wrongfully so. But he's been very consistent that this is not that the U.S. does not have a role in there, and that the American troops should come out. Some of that you can certainly offset with air power, but if the U.S. doesn't see a strategic interest anymore in that, the U.S. has what it at least considers more important strategic challenges it's facing, a commitment that is really sort of, I don't want to say half-hearted because there are 900 American troops potentially at risk, but certainly it's not seen as a strategic priority, then you are not really using those forces properly. You're potentially making them targets for a very unclear strategic objective. And I think that's what President Trump, in his usually inarticulate way, is trying to get across, that it's not a strategic interest for the United States at this point. Whether that is the right call or not, only time will tell. But certainly many administrations have been trying to make the change, saying that the U.S. should pivot to Asia, which I've always found just a little bit of an annoying phrase because, as you've rightfully called, I'm in Abu Dhabi. We are in West Asia. So there's no pivot to Asia. It's a pivot to a perhaps different part of Asia. But the U.S. doesn't see and is trying to extricate itself from this part of the region, at least this part of Asia, I should say, at least reducing its permanent presence so that it can focus its resources on what many believe is a more important challenge in East Asia.
Okay, all right. Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakrabarti, this was about American strategic relevance and America's strategic priorities. But when we talk about Russia, it was in a strategic partnership with Syria in the kind of military assistance it provided to Syria. In return, it got its, a naval base there, a 49-year lease at on the air base in Hemimim. So there was a lot of strategic dealing that Russia was doing with Syria. How do you see that really moving forward? There is clearly much lesser power that Russia can exude now in the West Asian region, particularly Syria.
It's a strategic loss for Russia, there's no doubt about it. Syria was always on the regime change list of the Americans. General Wesley Clark has said so openly in an interview that when he was visited Pentagon and during his time with Rumsfeld and Wolf, I think Paul Wolfson, whatever his name is, that they had prepared this list in which Syria was there, that they will seek regime change, and Iran was also on that list. So they managed to do it in different countries like Iraq, Libya, and Syria was also on the target. Russia and Iran decided that they will help Assad and not allow the Americans to get away with regime change. And the CIA was training Syrian rebels in Jordan, for example, and where I think they were helped by the Pakistanis also. Pakistan has a long connection with Jordan during the time of the Palestinian uprising, and where Pakistani generals helped Jordan to quell that uprising. Now, coming to what Russia has lost, yes, Russia. Question is why didn't Russia and Iran step up to the plate and save Assad? I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. One is that Russia itself has a problem in its backyard in Ukraine. War is going on. I think it's now, I don't know, 2.5 years that the war is going on, and it's really it's a war of attrition in many ways. And Iran has been weakened because Iran's proxy, the Hezbollah, has been also been not decimated, but certainly now on the back foot, and are unable to help the Syrians. So I think they felt that they were unable to help, or they've been unable to help in the way they used to do earlier, and hence they backed off and basically must have told Assad, "Hey, look, I think it's up to you to decide what you want to do." And the Syrian army also probably is reluctant. So Assad was left with no choice, with only one option, that to get out and say, okay. I accept the inevitable. And that is what has happened.
Okay. So we'll have to see how this really moves forward. Nikita, my apologies to you. I have paucity of time. I'll really have to wrap it up here. But next conversation, I assure you that we will talk much more on this as and when the developments do happen in Syria. But thank you very much to all of you gentlemen, Kamaraga, Dr. John Harrison, Ambassador Chakrabarti, and Nikita Menkovich. To all of you for sharing your perspective on Global Mirror. Of course, the situation remains tense in West Asia, and we'll have to keep a close watch, especially in India, because not just the West Asian region, but the entire world really will feel the ripple effect of what's happening in Syria. With that, it's a wrap on